Hello, Gina, Atasha, Liz, Mildred, Moish, Jillian, Nicole Hutchko, Mary, Tony, Brandy, Nancy, Chloe, Elizabeth, Heather, Lauren, and Nicole Yates. Thanks for a great week. First week of discussion. A lot of excellent points in the forums this week. I really appreciate your engagement with one another and with the material and with me. Just a couple of thoughts about our discussion this last week in the forum on ethical lessons. A lot of great examples in that forum. Thank you for sharing your stories. Some tough stories in there, some tough experiences, and I really appreciate your honesty and your engagement with one another. I noticed, one of the things that came up several times was that it can be a real challenge to speak up when one sees something unethical happening. Mildred told the story about the lawyer that she was working for adding charges about printing up medical records when the client had actually brought in the medical records. And the lawyer said to the client when questioned about that bill, well, we have to obtain our own records. And Mildred knew that this was a lie, but that's a very challenging situation in which to speak up. It's tough to challenge your boss in public. That's a tough thing. And I understand, Mildred, that you saw your choice to keep your integrity to be, well, I'm not going to work for these people if they tell lies like that. Sometimes that's the best thing that we can do. Chloe had an example of that too. You talked about how your students that you were working on the entrepreneurial project with didn't want to follow standards to keep the cream that you were making pure. They just were not going to follow proper procedures. And you talked with your classmates about it, your teammates. You talked with your mentor about it. You even talked to your professor about it, and you were just told, well, this is the way that we're going to do it. And your professor said, figure it out. You have to be a team player, even if your teammates are going to break the law and break safety protocols. And I think you did speak up. You spoke up to your teammates. You spoke up to your mentor. You spoke up to your professor. And I realized that you eventually just gave in to people who were not willing to listen to do the right thing. But as I said in the discussion forum, I think one of the things that we need to recognize about ethics and ethical mistakes that we make is that the mistakes of our past do not define our present or our future. That it seems like you really learned a lot about how to make good choices from that situation that you were put in. And I really appreciate your honesty and vulnerability in sharing that, because it's a good lesson for all of us that we may have found ourselves in situations where we didn't do the right thing, but that doesn't mean that we can't do the right thing in the present. I also Nicole Hutchko's example of her coworker actually reporting his girlfriend and having that result in her losing her job, that he stepped up and was honest and did the right thing and told the truth. And that was a good example too. It's sad that a job was lost, but patients needed to be protected. And although it was a sad ending, at least apparently the two of them stayed together, that they were able to recognize that he had to do the right thing in order to be faithful to his job and faithful to the patients. Another thing about that first discussion forum, several of you pointed out that small things can be important. Tony's example of the second oven mitt at Kohl's, and I think that's true. That being responsible about small things is important. Having integrity in all aspects of our lives is important. And it's not that we're going to be perfect. It's not that we're that we're never going to have slip-ups. It's not that we're never going to tell a lie again. But if we approach ethics in our whole lives as one of being responsible and having integrity, that will help us as leaders, because people have a sense of who we are. And if we are a person of integrity and honesty in all of our lives, that will come across, and that will help us be better ethical leaders. One of the other things that came up in that first ethical lessons forum was the idea that, well, maybe a good basic rule would be, first, to do no harm. If something isn't hurting anyone else, it might be an okay thing to do. And I think that's a great place to start. Because if you are hurting someone, if you are doing something that's injurious, chances are that's not acting ethically. But I'm not sure that that's enough. I'm not sure it's enough to just do no harm. Good place to start, but I think we are capable of more. And especially as ethical leaders, we're capable of more. We're capable of not just avoiding the bad things, but also engaging in and inspiring people to do better and to live better and to do better and live better ourselves. The second forum with John Maxwell's Ethics 101, the Golden Rule. Most of us did agree that the Golden Rule is a good rule to follow, that it's a good guide for life, and that ethics is ethics. And yet, it's not that simple, is it? Some good examples about how our professional ethics may sometimes legitimately be different than ethics in other parts of life. The example that came up about telling about someone else's misdeed. And this was on the ethics quiz, and the ethics guy says, if you see coworkers having a conversation, disclosing confidential information, being careless with confidential information, having a public discussion where it can be overheard, the ethics guy says, well, you should go and approach them and say, hey, maybe you didn't realize this, but you could be overheard, and address it privately. But several of you pointed out that in certain industries, that's just not acceptable. It's not acceptable to first go to someone else and point out that they're doing something that may be unethical, that you have to report what's happening. In industries like the financial industry, like a bank, it was pointed out, if you see somebody doing something that looks like it's unethical or illegal, you have to immediately report it to a supervisor, and that, in fact, it's an infraction if you don't immediately do that. And in some other industries where confidential information is of high regard, very important, in the medical field, we can't. In those instances where trust is so important, and keeping trust, keeping trust solid with customers and with the people that we serve, in those instances, just confronting someone privately isn't an option. And I think especially when everyone knows what the rules and the policies are, when everyone knows that you're obligated to report infractions to managers and supervisors, then that's the expectation. And so in that case, whereas in a personal interaction, yes, I would say it is more appropriate to have a private conversation and try to point out somebody's unethical behavior privately first before making it public or reporting it to others. Definitely in that situation, but in some professional situations, that would not be the right thing to do. And so we see that professional ethics can be different and can be more complicated than personal ethics or ethics in other aspects of our lives. So I'm looking forward to, one more thing. The Golden Rule. Some people have criticized the Golden Rule as not being adequate. To do to others as you would have others do to you might not be the best way to approach situations, especially when we're dealing with people who are very different than we are. And so Milton Bennett, who was a communication specialist back in the 70s, did a lot of work in intercultural communication. He proposed the Platinum Rule. Do unto others as they would have you do to them. And this invites us to imagine, what would another person want? May what they want be different from what I would want? And how can we respect those differences? How can we honor those differences? And so the Platinum Rule encourages empathy, and it encourages dialogue, because of course the best way to implement the Platinum Rule is not to just kind of guess what the other person might want, but to actually ask and inquire and try to understand what the other person might want, and then treat them accordingly. So, a little food for thought. I'm looking forward to week 2. If you have any questions, if there's any way that I can be helpful to you, please contact me. Thanks.